Right. Okay, well, welcome, Clare Parkinson. It's lovely that you've agreed to have a chat with us here on Social Workers Matter, which is the name of the podcast. Those of you who listen regularly will know that we interview not necessarily only social workers, but for the most part, we do. This whole reason for this podcast is really to share knowledge about our profession, to big up our profession in many ways. But I thought this was an ideal opportunity to speak with my colleague Clare Parkinson, who I've known for many, many years, but more so professionally. And she is about to enter another phase of her life. And I thought, oh, let me get hold of her and get her to agree to come here. So thank you so much for agreeing. Claire, we're going to really focus on you today because as I've said to you when we were off here, quite often we're so busy doing this, that, and the other, and particularly now during the COVID situation, we get very little opportunity to talk and share, and most of it seems to be very much about work, what's happening on a day-to-day basis, how do we get through the sort of teaching day and all manner of things. So this represented a really great opportunity to have a chat with you. So Clare Parkinson, tell us about you. Where did it all begin? Once upon a time.
Whoa. Okay, so it's lovely. Thank you for inviting me, and it's lovely to have the opportunity to gather up the different phases of my career and yeah, think about what I've learned from the different experiences and how I got to here from starting way back there.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you had picked up. So at the time, I grew up in Australia and I qualified. I did my social work qualification there.
Yes.
And so in Australia, the social work course, the social work training is 4 years long, and 4 placements as well.
Wow.
And so when I was a young, and also in Australia, student social workers tend to come straight from school into a training. So there was I.
Wait, were you born in Australia, Claire?
No, born in England.
Oh, okay.
And then as a 4-year-old, I went with my family and yeah, so we settled in Australia. And I think really it was thinking I was Australian. I set off to do my overseas travel and came back here.
Yes, yes.
I've been here ever since.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That one. But anyway, I mean, do you think that was always a desire to return to the UK, or is it the wanderlust that so many Australians have that brought you back, you think?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. Maybe because I was 4, I had some memories of here and I knew it was an important place,
Right.
but I suppose I had a kind of quite a burning curiosity to see for myself what it was all about.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So you've completed a 4-year training,
Yeah.
straight from school.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, straight from school. And my first placement was in a psychiatric hospital where, so it was the 70s. And the task then was to help people who were long stay patients in the hospital to settle in the community.
Right.
So yeah, that was an interesting introduction to the work, really, and formative for me, quite important, and influence.
What were your other placements?
Okay, so I did one placement in a place which was called the Catholic Family Welfare Bureau, where I worked with looked after children. I ran a girls group, and yeah, I mean, that really made me understand how important it is to bring yourself to the work.
Right.
And yeah, I enjoyed my drama group with the girls. And I invented the next placement for myself, which was in a women's health centre. I thought, yep, social work needs to know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I inveigled my way into a placement there. And yeah, that was a kind of making sense of really a political context, that it counts to engage, for social workers to engage politically, that counts as practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then my last placement was in as a community worker in a local council, and it just so happened that I was working with a detached youth worker as part of that placement, and the main venue was the pavilion on Bondi Beach. That was quite fun, and yeah, and relevant too. We really were working
Mm-hmm.
in a nice environment.
Wow. So were you doing detached youth work, or was you just working alongside?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was working alongside the person who had that as a job title,
Right.
and we were working out sort of what we hoped might be meaningful activities for people young people who didn't have much going on for them, didn't have jobs, didn't have much in the way of social connections.
Right.
So we would arrange film sessions that we hoped would interest them, and then use that as an opportunity to connect and engage and build up yeah, some kind of
Not
rapport.
too far away from what people are trying to do even today in terms of youth engagement. So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you did that.
Yeah.
Did you work? Did you actually have a job in Australia before coming back?
Yes, I did have a job in Australia. I worked for a place which is called the Australian Council of Social Services, which is a kind of a national umbrella organisation and a kind of a lobbying organisation. Um, but my task or my role was to do with the membership of ACOS, as it's known. So I was working with national member organisations, which were non-government sector
Okay.
organisations, and yeah, that was interesting too. And I understood something about organisational culture, and the importance of kind of getting to know an organisation,
Yeah.
and observing what's going on in order to be able to make any kind of difference. Um, One group, for example, that we had as members were individual organisations for lone parents, and we facilitated a kind of coming together of these individual organisations to make a federation of lone parents and a lone parent organisation.
Mm.
And that meant that they had, a bit more power, a bit more clout, a bit
Mhm.
more kind of influence.
It reminds me a bit actually of some work I did as soon as I left. Well, as soon as I qualified, and it was community based, but I was doing what sounds like a similar thing with young people, trying to get young Black groups to organize themselves underneath an umbrella organization. So it sounds very, very similar in that respect around community organization. Do you do you do you think at that point in your sort of career at the beginning that you had a sense that you were wanting to work therapeutically, or did that come afterwards? Do you think?
Right, yes. I mean, I did have that sense when I was doing my qualifying course, actually, that I wanted to work therapeutically, but I deliberately chose community work rather than casework, which would have been the more natural home for a therapeutically inclined person, just because I didn't really know much about it. And I did find it a little bit terrifying,
Yeah.
but, and in a way that work at ACOS was a bit terrifying in that sense too, that it was exhilarating, but it was also quite exposing to be center stage.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm not sure exactly how well suited I was for that exact position, but I probably did learn quite a lot from it.
So So to pick up the story and to continue on, you had your first job in Australia. It was with a sort of social welfare organization, albeit in Australia. So how did you get here then? What happened after that?
Yeah. So then I felt this sort of imperative really that I needed to travel. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to have a look at Europe, and I wanted to see what England was like.
Wow.
And so I set up via a conference in Dubrovnik, actually. There was a self-help conference, and I'd been writing a bit for ACOS about self-help organizations. And so I got my paper, my humble paper, accepted by this conference. So I kind of flew into sunny Dubrovnik, and yeah, I mean, that was quite something.
Did you have to present it or you?
Yeah, I had to present it. Yeah, yeah. I think I was up first, which was both a good and a bad thing, as you
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah,
imagine.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, and I met some nice people there, and made some friends and some connections. And I mean, really, I then took off as a lone traveller with my Eurail pass, and traveled from here to
Oh,
Yon in Europe. Sometimes staying with friends of friends, sometimes just exploring, and yeah, till eventually I wound my way into England.
wow. I mean, were your family sort of, you know, endorsing of all this, or did you
I
just not
think
bother
so.
with taking their permission? Okay.
Yeah, no, I think they were endorsing of it. My dad was a traveller himself and had built a boat for such purposes, and my mum was a great traveller in her day, and so yeah, I think they 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 were they
Yeah,
supported the idea.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank goodness. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, if it's not sort of asking too much, what old were you about when you began to think, well, okay, I'd like to stay around in England and work,
Mm.
develop my career further? I mean, were you clear at that point that it was social work you wanted to do? I mean, what
Mm.
was your thinking at that point?
Yeah, no, I was. I remember meeting with friends of friends, and they said, and so what are your plans? And I said, oh well, I need to find a place to live and get a job.
Mm.
And luckily, jobs were aplenty, so I was appointed by Camden Social Services, and
Oh, okay.
um, these friends had a spare room in their house, so everything was rosy.
Yeah, fell into
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was in Camden as a main grade social worker, age 24, and for the next 7.5 years or so, and yeah, that was fascinating,
You worked
fascinating
in Camden
times.
for 7.5 years.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Hmm.
Wow. So what? Sorry, I interrupted you, but what was that like?
No, that was really interesting. It was a time when there was still plenty of resources,
Mm.
and so we could do so many things. And we had a client group that were, a complete mix of working with children and looked after children and in child protection, and but also working with adults, people with learning disabilities,
That,
with very
that was a generic.
generic as they come. Yeah, it was generic, and it was also patch. Remember
Yeah,
patchwork?
like
Yeah, so it was patch based.
neighborhood schemes and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's useful because for some of our younger social workers and for lots who have even been some years in the career, um, all they've ever known is working in specialisms. Um, and I always remember, that whole expression about cradle to grave. I mean, what do you think about the whole kind of specialist approach? Um, and in terms of what you gleaned from your own experience as a generic social worker, how did that pan out?
Mm.
How did you feel?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I did think it mattered to take on board feedback, but also, how I felt in myself, what I thought I was good at.
Mhm.
So, I mean, what I noticed was that I was drawn to group work. I was drawn to training, and I was involved in actually training on group work.
Mm.
And I was drawn to mental health social work. And so I trained as an ASW whilst I was in Camden.
Mhm.
And also, yeah, the Camden social workers at that time had consultancy with a person who was based at the Tavistock. So we used to go with our team, you know, the whole
Wow.
team would go to the
Mm.
Tavi and we'd kind of chew the fat and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
share our problems and get their,
That's
you know,
precious,
help.
wasn't it? Good grief. Not many had that access.
Mm.
Um, and interestingly, I was speaking to someone from that local authority this morning, and you know, they're having as many struggles as everybody else, really. Um, Lack of resources and all the rest of it. But
Mm.
okay, so you did the social work thing,
Mm.
um, and you gave us a little hint that you were interested in group work, interested in training. Is this a good segue into how you got into the sort of education space, or did something else happen before that?
Well, kind of a halfway house happened before that, which is that I took a job at Hackney, in Hackney Training Department as a mental health training officer.
Mm.
And so I was running the approved social worker training for mental health social workers for a number of years. And I was also, after a while, um, leading the practice educator training courses for people interested in that. But around that time, I was thinking, oh, yes, I want to get more involved in social work education, but also I need to learn a bit more myself. I need some more training myself,
Yeah.
or more education, let's say. And so that's when I applied for the psychoanalytic studies course at the Tavistock.
Mm.
And that was a Tavistock UEL
Okay.
validated program.
Yep.
And, you know, it included baby observation for 2 years and 2 years of delicious psychoanalytic theory.
Uh,
And then this stream, which was called an application group, where you applied psychoanalytic ideas to everything under the sun, you know, to literature and to theatre and to art and all that kind of stuff.
wow.
Yeah, so that was good. And yeah, and because there was a link with UEL, I got to know a little bit about UEL,
Mm.
and then a job came up at UEL, which was a senior lectureship, and so I applied for that, and happily it was 4 days at UEL and 1 day at the Tavistock.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's how our paths probably came to meet, isn't it? But
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
My memory is so dreadful sometimes. Um, yeah, that's probably how. Because when I started having more involvement with the Tavistock, I was working more closely with people like Adrian Ward, um, and then you know as time moved on, people like Helen Hughley Jones,
Mm.
um, and then I always obviously I was always aware of you, but then I didn't really have as much contact. I don't think. Um, I remain curious how you move on to well you take more training, you move on um, UEL
Mhm.
where there was an opening.
Yeah.
Um, what happens after that?
So I was there for a long time, 17 years, you know, doing this 1 day a week at the Tubby and 4 days at UEL, where I was leading the qualifying BA in social work
Right.
and all that went with that. And plus I was doing post-qualifying, leading, you know, short courses. So I developed short courses for practice educators, for example, and also for best interest assessors.
Yes.
That was at UEL.
Yes. Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean,
What day were you? What day were you doing at the Tavistock? Because I just can't think.
Yeah, okay. So I was at one point leading the MA, the doctoral program used to have the code D60, didn't it?
Yes.
And it had an MA that was associated with it, pre-doctoral MA.
Yes.
And so I was leading that pre-doctoral MA whilst it existed. And then when in 2005, when the qualifying MASW, which you know well as M23, when that began, I was developing and leading the human growth and development module on that program.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the other thing I guess to acknowledge, and again, I'm not entirely sure how much of this you're doing, but I also understand clear that you've also been involved in clinical work as well. So not only are you doing the teaching piece, you're also doing the clinical work. Now, is that something? Was that a preference? Something you wanted to remain involved in? Why have you? Why did you do it that way? If you like?
Yeah, that's been a real joy to me to be able to get more involved in that since I moved to the Tavistock in 2014. Sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, an opportunity arose to join the family therapy workshop at the Tavistock and to work with families where the model is that two clinicians work together with a family, and then one brings the experience of the direct work with the family back into the family therapy workshop for everyone to have a think about together. And so you get lots of really good responses and feedback and ideas from other people about what might be going on for the particular family. And over time, we get to know each other's families quite well. I mean, it's a complicated workshop in a way because often there are only a few core staff who stay around and other people who come and go because they're trainees. You know, they might be psychiatrists, or they might be clinical psychologists, or they might be psychotherapists, or just, I think once we had someone who was a social worker, but she wasn't qualifying, she was already doing the doctorate.
Hmm.
So yeah, so an interesting multidisciplinary kind of group, but also quite, a changing group, a group that changes quite a lot.
Hmm. I don't think we really gave account of how you sort of reduced your time at UEL and made your way more and more.
Oh, well, actually, no, it's because someone that you mentioned, our colleague Helen Hingley Jones, had resigned. So a post was advertised, and so I applied for the post, and yeah, and
All right.
luckily was appointed.
I thought there was more mystery and intrigue, but clearly not. Okay.
No, sorry.
But I mean, to some extent, you would have clearly felt, well, this is what I want to do.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know if if you're happy to say a bit more about that, because I mean, you could have just continued working at UEL and sharing a bit of your time. But what was it that drew you?
To the Tavistock. Well, yes, what was it, Sylv? What was it? I mean, I guess that I already had a sense of the program, cared about the program. And so I cared about the future of the program. So when the course lead was, departing, I wanted to step in and pick up the reins, lest lest the program might, suffer from not having someone to lead it. I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
But also I'd worked so long at UEL by now that I felt, which I was so happy, I remember when I first started at UEL thinking, oh, my work, it involves reading and writing and communicating. So I was very happy there. And also I did like working with qualifying students and post-qualifying students, I like both of those.
Yeah.
But it seemed that students used to say to me, actually, you're more Tavi than you, EL.
Mm, mm.
And I guess for whatever reason, I felt that was true. I was probably always more Tavi than you, EL.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I think that probably is a bit of what I pick up really, um, in terms of your sort of interests and your approach and so on. Um, okay, so you've been leading the M23 program. What else have you been doing since you've been more
um,
a Tavi person?
yeah, so I've been leading the program, and happily, I've also been involved with the post-qualifying course as well, which I led until its demise. And so since then, I've been working, as you know, in the staff team that we are both on of the doctoral program. And so there, I lead one of the modules, which is all to do with organizational observation.
Mhm.
And yeah, and that's that's been very interesting to me. And I've been doing doctoral supervision, and I've been doing assessment at all levels, obviously qualifying level to also doctoral level.
Mhm.
And I've been actually where I can, I do some writing, but that's often the thing that I find it hard to, you know,
A bit neglected.
protect. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. A bit of a neglected child, my writing.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Um, and this has been you've had a long career, um, and you're sort of about to step into a new phase of life. Um, in terms of the timing with everything that's going on, it's pretty crunching. Um, and I don't know, in sort of making the decision to sort of to move on, so to speak, or to step back is probably more appropriate. Have you been thinking about your career, and have you been thinking about um, what you've kind of enjoyed, what you regret is probably too harsh a word, but what you've not been particularly happy about, and even in terms of how you see the environment, the career, the role, the career itself, i.e., social work. What are your reflections about all of that?
Big questions,
Big,
big
okay,
questions.
yeah. Take one
Yeah.
bit at a time.
Well, I mean, as I said to my students in my message to them, that I was stepping down, that it's just been a really just an excellent choice
Mhm.
for a lifelong career. I really feel very lucky to have chosen social work. And despite the ups and downs of it and the political difficulties that we so often face, and the um, the both the privilege and the pain of being close to people who are struggling,
Yes.
just such a privilege to be, have insights into so many different lives, and such a interesting way of um, moving through time, I guess, and through different political periods and so on, and hopefully making a contribution along the way.
Mhm.
It's felt, I think it's always felt like a meaningful choice, even though, of course, sometimes one's in rage against the conditions that people who are, marginalized in this society have to suffer, and that we, if we're, if we're able to connect, that we suffer alongside.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. Okay. And when you reflect on your career, I mean, yes, without doubt, it's an absolute um, important, career to be involved in, and sort of helping people who are really struggling and so on. But do you have any aspects that you would rather have not gone through, or that you um, have some degree of pessimism about. There may not be. I don't know. What are your thoughts as far as that's concerned? Because I'm
Yeah.
sure it will probably be linked a lot to the whole political landscape, but it may not be. What are
Mm.
your thoughts?
No, it's a good question. And when in thinking about talking to you today, I was thinking that one of the periods when, in the middle of the last decade,
Yeah.
1 minute we had a college of social work that was going to protect and develop post-qualifying frameworks and continuing professional development opportunities for social workers at all different levels, and the next minute gone. The funds were cut by the government, and it was finished. And I think that period was a bit of an unsavoury period with people being torn between, should we give our allegiance to BASWA or should it be the college? And so there was sort of the dynamics of rivalry and splitting
Mm,
and competition, and people didn't know often which way to choose. And yeah, that was an unfortunate thing. And I guess it matters because with the demise of the college, so the post-qualifying framework has disappeared. And so it's very difficult now for social workers to find um, courses that they will be encouraged to take, other than in-house training or very occasionally sponsored programs that we know about. Um,
mm,
and that seems a real loss. And yeah, so I'm hoping that that situation might
mm,
might take another turn,
mm,
and that social workers might feel that they have a right to continuing professional development, but not training that's linked to competencies or so-called knowledge and skill statements so much as free exploratory
For the sake
um,
of it, yeah.
training or learning or education that's based on learning from experience. And
I mean, it's interesting that you identify that period because, to be honest with you, Claire, I don't think many of us really understood all that was going on as far as that's concerned.
mm,
I'm not entirely sure if I spoke with peers or people on the ground whether they would have understood the whole BASWA and College of Social Work dynamic because
mm,
um, I don't know how well those organizations um, sort of relate to people at the front
mm,
line.
mm,
Um, so it's a really important point you make there, and one that I hope that listeners will take a hold of, because if I guess we're going to be continuing to campaign in some way, shape, or form, or if we believe social workers matter in our society, these are some of the things that we have to pay more attention to, I think.
mm,
Because when you're nose to the ground, slogging away, getting on with it, what's going on with BASWA and the College of Social Work seems extremely remote.
mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's one of the writing projects I do have on my on my table. So I hope to. I think it's very interesting to hear what you say about that, and I hope to shed some light on it because I agree it was pretty muddled and confused,
yeah,
wasn't it? And
yes,
distressing, really.
yeah,
We knew that something was gone and lost, but how and why?
yeah, yeah. I'm not entirely confident that everyone has a kind of an understanding of that, except those who are in the education space who deal with this sort of thing every day.
Mm,
Um, and interestingly, I for as many years that I've been involved in social work and I became aware of BASWA, I've always recommended, joining BASWA to students and so on, because it was the only the only one I knew that was representing, social work in
mm,
that respect. But again, don't know much about all their internal workings either, and what politics goes on in that arena. So interesting. Um, so you've got writing on the agenda.
A little bit of writing, at least. Yes,
Writing, yes.
definitely.
Um, is there anything else that you feel you kind of want to address in those years when you'll have a little bit more time?
Hmm. Well, I've got sort of immediate projects which include being an external examiner. So I'll carry on with that for a few years, I guess,
Yeah.
and hopefully do it justice. And I've got some doctoral supervision which will continue, which I'm committed to, and actually dissertation supervision too, which I'll continue until
Yeah.
hand in day.
Do.
Yeah,
Better do it.
definitely. Promise, I promise.
Yeah.
And then, oh, I don't know. So, I mean, I would like to say to you that I'll be traveling. France is beckoning, Australia is beckoning, many places in the world are beckoning, but we'll have to see.
Wait and
Mm.
see. Wow. Wow. Um, so Claire, as we sort of move to wrap up,
Mhm.
are there any sort of significant messages that you have for, let's say, our new generation of social workers who are kind of, about to finish and, you know, take it all on and so on? And I mean, also bearing in mind, again, probably this is a bit unfair, but bearing in mind what's happening with regards to all the significant changes we've had to make, COVID, remote working. I mean, what message of hope do you
A
have?
message of hope. Oh my goodness. Well, actually, my hope comes from the students themselves. They just continue to delight and, inspire me. And so, for example, the new year ones for the program who are going to be doing their baby observation remotely, using Zoom and not batting an eye. So one of them might ask a question such as, "So what do I do if the mother's, got the phone that is filming the baby,
Yeah,
and then the baby leaves the room?" and but it's just an ordinary question in a way,
yeah, yeah.
which would be the same kind of question if
Yeah,
it was face to face, wouldn't it? What do I do if the baby leaves the room? Do I follow? Do I ask the mother to follow?
yeah,
What do I do? Yeah. So just the kind of person who is attracted to social work seems to me of the years to continue to have the sort of qualities and the sort of capacities really that I recognize year after year after year doing social work admissions,
mhm,
and that is just delightful to see. And there's also something quite, don't you think, something quite resilient about social workers, a kind of determination to, stick with it,
yeah. Push.
whatever,
Mhm,
push through.
mhm.
Yeah. And so, I'm not sure I've got much to say that is inspiring for others, but I know that I'm inspired by that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent answer. Excellent. Okay, all right. Well, Claire, thank you so much for agreeing to share your sort of career trajectory with us. I'm sure we could spend a lot longer just chewing the fat, really, and talking a bit more about some of your experiences. But I won't. I respect your time and all that. Um, and I know that there will be some events taking place with your imminent departure, but you're not necessarily going to be totally gone. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.